Welcome to the Mindful Practice Podcast, a space for physicians navigating burnout, identity shifts, and career change without pressure or judgment. I'm your host, Dr. Bertina Hooks, a board-certified internal medicine physician, coach, and writer. Here we talk honestly about what it means to build a sustainable career and a life beyond medicine and survival. Welcome to the Mindful Practice Podcast. I'm Dr. Bertina Hooks, a board-certified physician and coach. This month we're talking about inclusion in medicine, not as a political conversation, but as a professional and structural one. Because sustainable healthcare systems require physicians who feel supported, respected, and able to fully practice as themselves. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Jessica Bunin. Dr. Bunin brings not only clinical expertise, but also perspective as a physician who identifies with the LGBTQ community. Welcome, Jessica. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Jessica, I wanted to begin at a professional level. When you think about your journey in medicine, how has your identity intersected with your professional experience, if at all?
Yeah, great question. It's intersected at 1,000 levels for me because I have been in the military for most of my career. So for 23 years, I was active duty Army. And so I was in the Army before, during, and after Don't Ask, Don't Tell as a gay woman. And so that it infiltrated into my life and my career at every level. When I was in school, in college, I don't know that I really realized I was gay or was in denial about that possibility and thought it would just be easier to not be in medical school. I don't know that I actually had time to think about it. And then when I started my residency, I actually spent a good amount of my residency being ill for one reason or another. My fourth year of medical school, I had thyroid cancer. And then my second year of residency, I had Hodgkin's disease. And so during that time, I think that I spent a good amount of my time just fearful that my classmates were going to pass me by, the world was going to pass me by, and I was not going to be actually able to make it to be a full-fledged physician. And so there was, those two things were always playing out against each other. And my second year of residency was really a challenge. I spent months having numerous surgeries and then months of chemo and a month of radiation, all for the Hodgkin's disease. When I came back after that year of treatment, everything was frightening for me. I was figuring out my sexual identity for the first time and actually having time to think about it. I was trying to adapt to being a physician again instead of being a patient, which was a very difficult adaptation for me. And academically, I was just struggling because I was coming back from not doing my studies for a year. And so I felt like everyone had passed me by and it was difficult on every level. And so really for a year after I came back from Hodgkin's disease, I would say I was clinically depressed and for part of that time even suicidal when I first came back. And so all of that made committing to a combined internal medicine psychiatry residency frightening. It made going to work every day frightening. And so it was a huge challenge for me that year. And fortunately, I was able to connect with all the things I needed to connect with to get my life back on track. But I would say both from a mental health perspective, from a cancer perspective, and from an LGBTQ perspective, all of that was a big challenge for me in residency.
Okay. So tell me, have you found medicine to be a space where you could be fully yourself, or has there been moments where you felt the need to compartmentalize?
Yeah, I would say that I don't think that I really believed that I belonged in medicine at all, probably until about 2013. So maybe even later than that. And it was a challenge at every level to try to figure out how to integrate my life and who I was into my work and into the social aspects of being a physician. For example, in residency and fellowship, I just never brought my partners around to be a part of events. I never could talk about what I did on my weekends. It was always very hush hush about who I could talk to and who I could trust as far as telling them that I was gay and what that would mean for my military career, as well as being in the Army and, being a physician. So all of that became a huge challenge. And when I finally did formally come out at work, there were several people who distinctly pulled back from supporting me, from mentoring me, from even wanting to be a colleague with me, mainly due to religious conflicts between my LGBTQ status and their religious status, but a number of different things, which I felt was a huge struggle for my career. So I was a critical care fellow and then attending around that time as I was figuring myself out. And it was huge to not have the support and mentorship that I was watching people around me have. I think it was hard enough to be sort of a woman in critical care medicine. I was often the only woman in the room, but certainly the only gay woman, and trying to figure out how to balance that and be able to talk about my wife and who could I invite to my wedding, like all of those sorts of things were a huge challenge for me.
And were you able to deal with it sounds like you were dealing with a lot of different things, your own health issues, your sexual identity and things like that. Were you able to overcome your depression, anxiety associated with those things?
Yeah, great questions. So I would say that I was very fortunate from the perspective of being a psychiatry resident. When you're a psychiatry resident, you get assigned what we called at the time a training psychotherapist. That person is supposed to be the person that you talk about your cases with and make sure that you're not getting over attached to your patients and talking about all your bias and how that might be coming through. And I was able to use that individual for that purpose, but also he became my therapist. And so consequently, for years, really almost 25 years now, I have known that individual and he has been my therapist. I'm a huge advocate of therapy on every level for people. So I think that's a huge part of it. And I definitely think that folks who have done deep work on figuring out themselves, whether that's through reflection, through spirituality, through therapy, whatever that may be, coaching for any specific person. But it changed my life to have that opportunity to go through that. But the other side of that is even when you feel like you're alone and you're the only, there's always someone there who wants to support and wants to be there with you. And I specifically remember coming out to one of my peers and she just was like, oh, okay, cool. And sat down and we just started talking about it. And so she became a big outlet for me to talk about with work and to talk about who was safe to talk to and who wasn't and how we could go about working that into my life. And so I think there's a huge element of even when you feel like you're the only or you feel like you're alone, there's always someone who wants to be there and wants to support. And I think starting with one person and one conversation can then build it out into a safer situation. And it was truly that one person that started me feeling much safer with all of my identity factors.
That's good. And I think it is important for someone to have a safe person like that to share and be vulnerable with, whether it be a friend, a colleague, a therapist, or a coach, family member, if possible. So definitely. Because I think we all struggle with different aspects of our lives, whether it be health or our identity in different ways. And so having that outlet and having that support is key. I think it's crucial. Definitely.
I agree.
Yes. And so I appreciate you sharing that part of your story. I would love to talk a little bit more about the culture and professional environment in medicine. Medicine traditionally has been very Pacific, has had a very Pacific professional culture. In your view, how has that culture evolved over time, regarding inclusion? And where do you think we're doing well? And where do you think we still have a need for improvement from a professional standpoint?
Yeah. Bertina, I think I would have had a very different answer to this even just a few years ago. From 2019 to 2022, I was a dean of faculty development. 2022, I became a dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion until 2024 became a dean of community and educational culture. And then shortly after that, that department was dissolved. And so I think we were really on the right track, making a lot of inroads in helping folks understand the culture and how restrictive it can be for some people, how alienating it can be for some people, how isolating it can be. And so I took some joy, honestly, in being able to be the person that was there for a lot of our students when they struggled, for a lot of our faculty members who couldn't find their safe space. So it was a joy to me to be able to be that for them. I also had the opportunity to do a lot of great projects with health equity. One of my mentees, who's a fabulous med psych resident, is very interested in health equity. And so we created a health equity curriculum. She did something called health equity rounds in the hospital. So we got to do some research on those projects and bring some other people into that fold. I felt like we were like making huge inroads and making big changes. And I'm fearful that a lot of that is disappearing and falling apart as more DEI endeavors are being closed down.
Yes, I agree. Unfortunately, that's what's happening in today's climate, unfortunately. Let's talk a little bit about patient care perspective. From a patient care standpoint, do you think representation matters? And in what ways might physicians from diverse identities contribute to patient trust or communication in meaningful ways?
So I feel this question deeply in a lot of ways. I know specifically when I first came back from being ill, it changed how I viewed patient care, how I viewed approaching human beings differently. And I'll give you a specific example. One of my first jobs when I came back, I was on call as a psychiatry resident in the middle of the night. And I was called in to come see a patient in the emergency department. And I was told that I needed to come into the hospital to declare her incompetent. And that was all I was told on the phone. I went in, I talked a little bit to the emergency room attending. He said, oh, she got bad head CT results today and was told to come back in. I don't know her. Her oncologist isn't in house anymore, and she's demanding to go home, but we think she's going to potentially die tonight or be really harmed if she goes home. And so I took that and I went in the room and I just sat next to her. And we just looked at each other and introduced each other, and I let her just cry. And I gave her a hug, and we sat there and we talked about the whole situation. And I said, what's going on? Because they asked me to come talk to you, and I'm not sure that I really understand why. And she said, someone came in, told me I had too numerous to count tumors in my head, and then I didn't hear anything else that they said. That was the last thing I heard. So I don't know what they want from me. I just know that no one is listening to anything that I need. And we sat there for an hour talking it through and talking about the ins and outs of her disease process. So she had a history of breast cancer years and years ago, but had no idea that it was back. So this was her first indication that she was even ill in any way, shape, or form. She was devastated by that. And as we talked more, she was more than happy to come into the hospital and get admitted and get the treatment she needed. She just needed someone to go home and take care of her cat. And so, yeah, we figured out.
Which is very reasonable.
Yeah, right? Like completely reasonable. But she just couldn't hear after she was given the shock of a diagnosis or the shock of her radiographic findings. And I don't know that if it had been a year prior and I hadn't been ill, if I would have had the wherewithal to just sit next to someone and just hear their story and wait for them to tell me everything that they needed from me, everything they heard from doctors before me. I think I probably would have been more rushed. It was the middle of the night. I probably would have just wanted to get out of there and get back home. But it seemed like the most important thing on earth to me to sit with her and understand her better and help her get on a path to recovery. I actually never saw her again after that night, but I think about her all the time. I see her face when I'm taking care of patients. So absolutely, from the perspective of having been ill, that absolutely interacts with patient care. As far as being a gay woman, I don't think about that much in my clinical care. I make every effort to signpost in some ways that I am gay friendly. Of course I am, but I have stickers on my water bottles. I have stickers on my coffee mugs. I have a little ally pin I wear. I have a pin that says you're safe with me. So I try to signpost that I am a safe place for individuals, but I rarely talk about it. Frequently in the intensive care unit, when I've taken care of someone who's been critically ill or the family members are around, someone will say something along the lines of, wow, your husband's really lucky to have you. And I have to do the mental gymnastics every time of if it's worth correcting them or not, if it's going to affect how they see me, if I do correct them. And so for every single interaction, every time that happens, I play the game of, okay, how is this going to play out? If I just say, oh, because they see my ring, they know I'm married. it's the decision of whether to share that or not. And when I have shared that, sometimes it has changed the relationship in a really positive way. And sometimes it has made people cold and closed off. So I haven't always made the right decision about when to share that or not. But I think it matters for people to know that you're a safe place to talk about whatever they need to.
I definitely agree. And I think that that's the impact that we can, having diversity in medicine means that we can contribute to providing that safe space, I think, for physicians and communicate in meaningful ways. As you shared, your experience with being sick, being on the patient side, actually influenced you to take that time and create that space for a patient when you were being a physician. And I think that's the thing that I have learned in my own experience with being a disabled Black woman physician in medicine, is that I could bring a unique perspective and I can create that safe space for my patients as well. And I think being a patient helps us understand and empathize with our patients who are going through sometimes the most challenging, vulnerable situations in their lives. And to be there as a physician is a great responsibility. But also, I think that it also helps, our experiences help shape how we practice medicine and how we are there for our patients as well. So I appreciate you sharing. That was a great example that you shared. I remember sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, unable to make myself walk inside. That's the moment I realized burnout wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. Medical school taught us how to practice medicine. Nobody taught us how to intentionally design a career or a life that actually fits who we've become. That realization led me to build a simple framework. 5 steps I now call the 5 R's that took me from being an overwhelmed and uncertain physician to a clear, confident, and financially resistant one. I've walked this path myself, and I've now guided other physicians through it too. Physicians who didn't think there was a way out. If you're a physician who knows something has to change, I'm teaching this entire framework live and completely free. Go to the website below to save and reserve your seat. I also wanted to talk a little bit about psychological safety and professional growth. One theme we've explored this month is psychological safety. Without getting into any personal details, what do you think psychological safety means for physicians navigating sexual identity in medicine?
Yeah, I think psychological safety, honestly, is the same for everybody in medicine. I think there's so much hierarchy that I think it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying to be a student. I think it's terrifying to be an intern. I think it's terrifying to be a resident. And we forget that as soon as I think a little bit maybe every year, we forget more and more what it's like to be in those realms where you are watched constantly and evaluated constantly, and not knowing the expectations of the people around you at any given time. And so when I think about psychological safety, to me, that means that people feel safe bringing up any of their concerns at any time without any fear of retribution or someone being mean to them or someone yelling at them or someone giving them a bad grade. And I don't think that it matters who you are. Anyone can create better psychological safety and anyone can be the victim of poor psychological safety at any point in their career. And so it means the world to me to think about how do we, if we don't feel like we have the power to create a huge psychologically safe environment in our whole hospital or in our whole medical school, how can we create psychological safety in our, so when you're precepting one student, when you're precepting 5 students, when you're teaching in a small group activity, how do you create psychological safety in those scenarios so so that if someone is going to leave your realm and go back to work and be nervous somewhere else, at least you can take care of them and create a situation where they can ask the questions they need to ask. They can feel seen and known and ask anything that they felt like they've missed along the way, or ask something about how they can get what they need as a human being to be successful in medicine, which is a really hard thing to do, no matter what, no matter who you are. And so I think about that a lot. And I think about, what are the ways I can do that? Is it about eye contact? Is it about setting expectations up front and having that honest conversation about my role and how I'm going to affect them? Is it about deliberately stating that I want feedback at the end of each day or each week or however long it is that I'm working with someone? I want the feedback because I want this to be an environment where you can learn everything you need to learn. I want to know what you have learned. I want to know what you need to learn. And I want to know how I'm contributing to that and how I can contribute better. And so all of us, even if we can't control the hospital, even if we can't control the whole ward, we can control how we teach people, both patients and trainees. We can affect how we do it in our micro. And then if we each start working in our own microclimate, it starts adding up. And so I think that's a huge part of how we should think about psychological safety. It's not just about the dean of a medical school or the CEO of a hospital system. It's about every single one of us who works there, creating that space around us, and also creating that in a very interprofessional way. So physical therapists feel safe speaking up, nurses feel safe speaking up, so that we are all equal and can help each other grow and learn through this process. Because I have to admit, as I get further and further from my training, I feel like I'm further and further behind in critical care all the time. So I love learning from interns and residents and nurses every time I'm working. So that's my feeling about psychological safety.
Okay. And what do you think makes a workplace or a training environment feel safe? And what do you think makes it feel uncertain?
Yeah. I think the thing that makes it feel uncertain the most is silence. I think there's a lot of concern when there is a situation, whether that's COVID, whether that's a government shutdown, whatever it is, where we don't have all of the information we would like to have and we can't give people answers, and we're afraid of being wrong in the answers we give, so we don't give any answers and any information. And I think that destroys safe environments. I think people feel like there's not even anyone I can ask. No one knows the answers. No one cares about my perspective. No one's going to help me through this. We saw this a lot with the government shutdown when our junior folks couldn't figure out where they were going to get money for gas to come in each day, how they were going to pay for childcare when government childcare was closed. How were they going to make this work when they weren't getting paid? So many people live paycheck to paycheck, right? How are they going to make it work? And I think the more senior leadership has a really difficult time understanding and remembering what it was like. Just like we forget what it was like to be a student or an intern, also our senior leaders forget what it's like to be a junior faculty member or a student even, and trying to figure out how the ends are going to meet. And so the silence. I think the silence is the most dangerous part. I think people are very appreciative to even hear that you don't know, to even hear that this is the information we have. These are what our values are. Here's what I'm going to find out. And here's how often I'm going to report back to you. And I may not have any new answers, but I might. But regardless, I'm going to keep that chain of communication going in both ways. And there's so much that happens that doesn't do that. We just become so afraid of not knowing the right answers that we just don't give any answers. And I think that's terrible. So opening the lines of communication, I think, can be the most important part of psychological safety. I also think that creating a culture of feedback is key. And I know I mentioned earlier, like asking my students one-on-one or residents one-on-one to genuinely give me feedback, but every leader should have some sort of training on how to effectively receive feedback so that they don't get defensive, so that they appreciate it, so that they understand no one's going to waste time and give you feedback if they don't think you can be better. If they're afraid of you and they don't think you're going to change, they're not going to give you feedback. Right? So if someone's going to give you feedback, it means they believe you can do better. They trust you enough to give you that feedback. And so we all need to learn how to accept that without getting defensive, how to give ourselves a pause to calm down and be ready to hear it, and then hear it, and then act on it. and then tell people how we acted on it and show people how we acted on it.
Right.
There's a lot of closing that loop on the other end that we don't necessarily do well.
Yes, and I think that all physicians have the potential to be leaders, and they also need to be transparent, and they also need to speak up. Silence is what keeps the stigma of these things going. And so I think that's very important for physicians to speak up, to provide feedback, to provide insight, and to be transparent, because we don't have all the answers, and it's okay not to have all the answers. But I think it's important to be authentic and transparent with others and share information and receive information and feedback that can make the medical system overall better. Definitely. Yeah. I appreciate your insight on that. That was great. So I'm going to pivot a little bit into like the executive lens and look a little bit at leadership and systems. Let's talk about leadership. And if you were advising hospital executives, CMOs, or department chairs, with what practical steps could they take to ensure that inclusion is not just symbolic, but also operational?
Yeah. The most important thing is to get out of your office. That is step number one. You have to see how things are functioning, and you have to watch the sort of emotional tone of what's going on in your units, in the relationships, in the patient care. And so I think that is huge. A really important part of the executive leadership is to understand that. The next part I would say is you cannot lead others in an inclusive manner if you haven't done your own work first. And so I truly believe the art of reflecting, understanding when it's important for you personally to pause, and learning how to do that, how to identify that and how to do that. Identifying how to give yourself compassion when you need it, so you're not being too hard on yourself and therefore being too hard on other people. Right. Understanding your values and what you want to bring. So I think a lot of that, like reflection and deep work, I think has to happen before you can lead effectively. And then it's all about trust building. And I don't think it's about how do we be inclusive of Jess Bunin, who's had cancer 3 times and is gay, or how do we try to be more inclusive of our disabled population. I think it's building trust at every level, so that when I'm doing something that is not helping you function better with your disability, how do you feel comfortable coming to me and telling me that? That is what's really key. And so part of that inclusive is hearing changes, making changes based on what you hear people need, and then report back that you are indeed making changes based on information people give you. I think nothing shuts down trust and inclusivity more than saying you're doing something and not actually doing it, or not reporting back, or not saying you want the feedback, but then you don't do anything with it. Just destroys trust.
Yeah. And I think when you say that it has to be across all levels, I think it needs to be in recruitment practices, in mentorship pipelines, in representation of the leaders, in clear human resource processes. I think it has to be across the board, that inclusion.
Yeah. And I think that a huge part of that also is you just can't tolerate anything that is infringing on that. Must call it out in real time as it's happening, no matter how uncomfortable or how problematic you think it might be. If someone sees you stop an act that is not inclusive and ensure that you correct that person, it changes everything about how people feel about it. We don't tolerate that here. We don't tolerate microaggressions here. We don't tolerate harming people. We don't tolerate excluding people. And when people see that in real time happening, then they know you're truly an advocate for them, not just someone who's going to do it when it feels comfortable or when it's easy. So I think that's another important part of it.
Tell me what do you think real structural inclusion looks like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, to me, what does it look like? So when you say that to me, I think structural inclusion means that everyone feels safe walking into my organization, whether that's a school or a hospital. Everyone feels comfortable walking in, they can bring their authentic selves to work, and there's honest conversation happening all around us. I think we've done ourselves a huge disservice by saying we should never talk about religion or politics at work. We just shouldn't know that about each other, and we shouldn't talk about it. And we've made it this fearful barrier between people. And so people can't talk about what they did with their weekend, or people can't talk about how they celebrate a holiday, or people can't talk about things that are important to them, identity issues that are important to them. And so what it means when it truly is a structurally inclusive institute is that free speech, free conversation is happening across difference. I'm getting to know you better and understanding your struggles. You're getting to know me better and understand mine. And we're both going to work through them together moving forward and figuring out how to do that most effectively. And we're going to co-create the systems to do that. I'm not going to sit at the top and dictate down how things will happen. I'm going to put together a team of people at all levels so I can get that input and we can co-create a plan moving forward to get to that place where that conversation is happening openly. And honestly, I think people want it. I think people are craving the connection. People are craving the inclusion. People are craving being heard and being seen. And if we can put together teams that do that, that think about that on a regular basis, we can make a huge difference.
Definitely. And I think validation is so important to the human experience. And that's really what you're talking about there, is validating people where they are, meeting them where they are, and then inciting that change that needs to happen so that everyone does feel safe. That's really important, to have a safe environment and space to be your authentic self.
What if the career you work so hard to build isn't the career you have to keep forever? If you're a physician feeling trapped, not because you're not skilled or dedicated, but because no one ever taught you there were other paths, you're not alone and you're not stuck. I'm Dr. Bertina Hooks, and I created the Phoenix Physician Freedom Blueprint, a 5-step framework physicians are using right now to move from burnout to clarity, purpose, and financial freedom. This isn't a theory. It's the exact roadmap I use to rebuild my own career. And it's already working for physicians who felt exactly like you do right now. Clarity, confidence, financial resilience. Join me live for free, and I'll walk you through the entire framework. Register now at the website listed below for the free live masterclass.
I'd like to talk a little bit about advice to other physicians. For physicians who may be early in their careers and navigating identity questions while also trying to establish credibility in their careers, what would you want them to know?
Yeah. The first thing that I would say if someone came into my office wanting to talk about this is that you're enough. You have everything you need to be successful and do this. You belong here doing this.
Yeah.
And finding someone who's going to help you believe that of yourself, whether that's a coach, whether that's a mentor, whether that's a peer, whoever it might be, having someone who knows that about you and believes that about you as much as I believe that about you is going to be really important. Because as soon as we feel excluded, there's so many things that go awry. Right? We stop speaking up. We stop being engaged in our work environment. We think that we need to prove ourselves by pushing ourselves harder and harder because we're not good enough as we are. And so now we're in an unsustainable cycle of exhaustion. And so it's so important to have people that are your outlets. You mentioned earlier, whether that's within the institution or exterior to the institution, whether it's a family or a friend, it doesn't matter, but you have to believe you're enough. And I'm not going to sit here and say that through my career, I believed I was enough, because through most of it, I did not. It's really hard to get there. But even every time someone hears it from someone, it gets a little bit closer to true for them.
Yes.
And so we need to be telling it to people. We need to believe it of people. We need to give them the support they need to be successful and the safe places to talk about whatever it is they need to talk to. I worry that as DEI offices shuttered and community offices shuttered, that there became fewer and fewer places where people did feel safe speaking out, and more concerned about who is safe, who can I talk to? And so I think finding one person who's a faculty member at your institution who can have those conversations with you and give you some guidance about who is safe and who's not, like it's worth having that conversation so that you can create a safe space for yourself so that you can start to believe that you're enough to do everything you need to do to be a successful, joyful, happy physician, which does not mean being perfect. None of us are perfect. It does not mean pushing yourself and doing 20-hour days every day. It does not mean being the last one in the office every day. It means doing something that you can sustain and love so that you can give patients the care that they need.
So important. And I do think that having a long, fulfilling, sustainable career is what physicians really need to be seeking. And because burnout is sometimes inevitable with the chronic work stress that we endure and having such a high demand job. And so we do need to have support systems, burnout recovery systems in place to help increase resilience and make sure that physicians are able to have long careers that they are happy and fulfilled doing and doing what they really love, which is helping patients in the end.
I think of that as, my friends and I talk about that as a moral courage support system. So I think about that as having a category of people who are above you, whether that's advisors, mentors, those people who can help you reflect, the people who can give you advice based on the understanding the culture of the environment, but creating those advisors, having a couple there that you can trust and go to, having a couple of folks who are in your peer network that you can trust and go to. And then two other things that I think are part of that support system that we don't necessarily think of. One is understanding the policies of where you are. Like, what do you need to do? What don't you need to do? And how does that fit together? And where can you get help if you need it? So understanding that, the sort of HR policies, the rules and regulations, all of that is really important, and knowing when you can get support from that neck of the woods. And then the final part of the moral courage support system is understanding what you need for your wellness. So if that is a change in your schedule, if that is getting a therapist, if that is exercise, whatever it is for you specifically, that is your wellness, that is non-negotiable, that is going to be your thing that's going to keep you going in the long term. So it's not just one person, it's not just yoga, like it's all of those things put together that creates this system around you that allows you to say what you need to say, do what you need to do to be successful over the long haul. Because it is a long haul. It's not a marathon. It's so far beyond a marathon that it's ridiculous. And so if you don't find a sustainable way earlier, it's just going to get harder and harder, particularly with a lot of our healthcare systems are getting more and more challenging to work in. So all of that makes it more important that you find your network around you that can support you.
And I think, how can you protect your authentic self and your professionalism? How can young physicians or early career physicians do that? What is your advice?
Yeah, I think in medicine, if we're going to be honest about it, like we are not in a place where all of us can bring 100% of our authentic selves to work every day and that be okay.
I understand.
And we talk a lot about like code switching. Some people have to like really code switch exhaustingly every minute of their life every day. Some people have to do that a little bit every day, but it's important to know where you are on that spectrum and what it's going to take and who are the people that you need to surround yourself with to be successful doing that. But we still are in a very white supremacist culture where professionalism has been defined, and we're not at a place yet where we're able to use like innovation and diversity as springboards for creation and for innovation and for growth. And so we haven't, as a profession, entirely figured that out.
Right.
And so it is a challenge to try to figure out, what do I have to do? And I'm going to go back to saying mentors are key, because you need mentors who are going to be honest with you about how you can present yourself in an interview, for example. Or for example, I had a student recently who was getting poor reviews at work every day because they were going to work and diving into work and not saying hello to anyone. And they didn't understand how important the social aspect of working meant. And when they learned that, they actually started enjoying work more. They just didn't know. They thought that they were there to look professional, and looking professional to them meant working hard, being at their computer all the time, or being in a patient's room, and not wasting time jibber jabbing with people, but people thought they were not being part of the team, not being social, not getting to know them if they weren't doing that. And so some people just need their eyes open a little bit and can actually make it a more joyful experience, but you have to have a mentor who can be honest with you about that and who's willing to watch you in a work environment and see how you're doing, see how you might be able to do better. Watch in a work environment to make sure that you're not indeed just surrounded by jerks. Like maybe you're doing fine and you're just on a team that's really harsh. And you need to know that too, so that you don't change your behaviors to adapt to a team that isn't someone who you would want to be. So there's a lot that goes into that, but I think the key really is having good mentors and coaches that support you through that. They can give you guidance on when is the right time to be your fully authentic self, and maybe when do you have to hold back a little bit. And my number one rule always is that when you walk into a patient's room, it is the patient's room. It is not your room. Like your needs don't matter anymore. It's all about getting the patient what they need. And if that leads to harm, then that's a whole other thing. But short of harming you in any way, like you need to be there to give the patient what they need in any scenario, and leave yourself, leave all of your baggage, leave all of your bias, leave all of your authenticity, however beautiful it might be, leave that behind the door so you can 100% be there for your patient.
Because that's truly professionalism in our field, is that you do have to put the needs of your patient first in all aspects. And let the bad day or the conversation you just had. That's why I talk a little bit about mindfulness before we go into each patient's room, doing deep breathing or centering or grounding exercises to help recenter, refocus on what you're trying to do and help you be productive and present, I think, also when you're with your patient, so that you can provide them with the best care.
Yeah, I think a great way to center yourself before you go in a patient's room too is just finding that patient's nurse. If you're an inpatient, the ICU nurse knows the patient's inside and out. If you're on a ward, the nurse knows the patient better than you do. So just stopping by and saying, is there anything I should know about how the morning is going before I walk in to talk to this patient? To get you grounded in what they need from you. And nurses know that. People know that better than you do. And so having those conversations is another great way to ground you to your patient's needs before you walk into the room. So it's another way to experience mindfulness where it's not actually about you, but it's about figuring out who you can be in that moment to be what they need.
That's a great point. And I like that example that you gave, because I did that as well when I was working as a hospitalist and rounding on patients. I always spoke to the nurses because they really do know their patients well. And having that collaboration with them can really help you know maybe some of the socioeconomic or emotional things that are going on before you even enter the room, so that you can provide that space for the patient. Definitely. Jessica, I really appreciate the thoughtful and measured way you've approached this conversation. I think it's important that we show inclusion conversations can be professional, calm, and system-focused. This month has reinforced something for me. Inclusion in medicine is not about politics, it's about sustainability. It's about whether physicians feel safe enough to focus on excellence instead of self-protection. When physicians have to compartmentalize their identity, energy is diverted. And when systems are clear, respectful, and predictable, physicians can lead more fully. And leadership diversity strengthens institutions and improves patient care. If we want better outcomes for patients, we must build environments where physicians can practice medicine without carrying unnecessary psychological weight. This includes physicians with disabilities, from diverse backgrounds, across the LGBT+ community. Inclusion is not a statement, it's an infrastructure. So if you're a physician who's thinking about leadership, systems change, and sustainable career design, that kind of thinking we explore inside this podcast is not politics, not division, just thoughtful, structured leadership development for physicians navigating complex systems. Thank you, Jessica, for being part of this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
As I reflect on my own journey, I'm also reminded that some stories take years before you fully understand why you had to live them before you could tell them. This season has been especially meaningful for me because I recently signed a publishing contract for my upcoming memoir, Fire to Freedom, a journey of transformation, renewal, and resilience. In many ways, this book captures not only moments like the ones I share today, but the deeper journey of resilience, identity, healing, and becoming through personal adversity, professional growth, and life transitions that shaped who I am today. I will be sharing more in the months ahead as we move toward the book's release. But I wanted to mention it here because this story and many others live within those pages. Sometimes the chapters we survive quietly become the chapters we are later called to share. And if my story helps someone else believe that adversity does not disqualify purpose, then every chapter has meaning.
Thank you for listening to the Mindful Practice podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, you can find free burnout and career clarity resources at pinnaclebusinessacademy.org. And if this podcast supported you, please consider subscribing or sharing it with a colleague who might need it. Remember, you are more than your white coat. You are not broken, and you are allowed to evolve. Until next time, take care of yourself, not just your role.